Hey, welcome to the Oz Soundz Unleashed podcast number 11. I'm your host, Jason Plumridge, and today we're doing something a little bit different. No guests, no interviews. Instead, we're taking a deep dive into the state of independent music in 2026. What trends are we shaping the industry? What opportunities are there emerging? What challenges are artists facing? And perhaps most importantly, what should independent musicians be paying attention to right now? Today's episode titled The State of Independent Music in 2026, What Every Artist Needs to Know. If you're an independent artist, this is something you definitely want to hear. Because let's be honest, the music industry changes faster than almost any other creative industry. What worked 5 years ago doesn't necessarily work today. What works today may be irrelevant by tomorrow. So grab a coffee or a beer, settle in, and let's unpack what's really happening in the independent music scene right now. All right, so for decades, artists have chased the radio. Before that, they chased record deals and still do. But today, they chase playlists and algorithms. Here's the problem, though. Discovery has become both easier and harder at the same time. Unfortunately, anybody can upload music, whether you're good, bad, or indifferent, and even AI engines. Anybody can release globally, and we're seeing that right across all of the streaming platforms. Anyone can distribute a song worldwide from their bedroom now. No need for a professional recording studio. The doors are that good. And that's incredible. That's an absolutely fantastic thing. But when everybody has access, competition explodes. And not only are we competing against human, we're now competing against human against machine and AI. We're seeing thousands of tracks uploaded every hour, some of which, as I said, are AI. The challenge isn't releasing the music. The challenge is actually getting discovered. So are the platforms really helping independent artists in 2026, or are they hurting them? I want to also explore things like, has the playlist culture replaced radio gatekeepers with algorithm gatekeepers and decisions made by computers? Why do so many great artists still struggle to find audiences? We see it all the time. Our local emerging indie artists are fantastic musicians. They've applied hours and hours into their craft, but they just can't get a start. And is social media now more important than the music itself? That's something that we need to actually consider, because, you don't have to be the best musician these days. You just have to have the right image, and that's problematic. All right, so let's unpack some of these discussion topics. Are streaming platforms helping or hurting emerging artists? I've got a certain opinion about this, and that opinion is that they are both. They're both hurting emerging artists, and they're helping them as well. This is probably the most divisive question in modern music. 20 years ago, if you're an independent artist, your opinions have always been valid. Your options were limited, right? You needed a record deal. You needed radio support. You needed physical distribution models. You needed some press coverage, be it local or regional, and you needed industry connections. Those are the sort of 5 key things. But what about today? Anybody can upload the song worldwide in minutes. In that sense, streaming has become completely democratized music distribution. The barriers to entry have never been lower for emerging indie artists, right? You can upload it, you can produce it, record it, upload it, all from the space of your own bedroom, and that's good news for artists. But is it also bad news, right? What happens to those studios that formerly were operational? I'm talking about the big major labels as well as the lesser, smaller labels that were around and still are, right? Although it seems these days that a lot of the independent artists are creating their own studios, from the comfort of their own homes. So distribution is no longer the problem, right? Getting the attention is. Distribution is easy, right? But getting someone to actually listen to your song, or your, if you're a videographer, getting you to listen to watch the video, right? The distribution is no longer the problem. You can get it out there. The problem is capturing that person's attention and keeping it. The challenge isn't getting your music onto Spotify or, Apple Music or SoundCloud or anything. The challenge is getting anyone to notice that it's even there. And, that's a hard thing for an artist to think about, right? You ply your trade, you take months and years to structure your instrument and write your song. You record it. You put plenty of hours into mixing, mastering it. You might have an assistant to that, and then no one hears it, or you get 5 likes. That's pretty disheartening. So consider this, right? Every day, Tens of thousands of songs are uploaded to streaming services. That means that artists aren't competing against their local music scene anymore. You're not just competing against the local band that was around the corner. You're competing against the entire planet. And that's huge, right? That global market is huge. So while streaming has given access to everybody, it's also created an unprecedented competition. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that competition is bad. What I'm saying, though, is it better to have a tiny chance of reaching a global audience or a larger chance of reaching a smaller audience through to more traditional channels? My view is that streaming isn't hurting artists, right? It's exposing a reality that's always existed. Making music is one skill, but getting people to care about it is another. And this is the issue and the discussion point around AI. They have no heart, right? They have no soul. It's not a human emotion. So streaming didn't remove competition. It just revealed how much competition there really is across the planet. It's just that the distribution model was such that you couldn't get it to the other side of the planet. Now, one statement I've been thinking about recently is streaming didn't remove the competition. It revealed how much the competition there really is. And I think that's one of the most important truths in the music industry today, because if you go back 20 or 30 years, many artists looked at major labels, commercial radio stations, the music television channels, the rages of the world, and believed that they were the reason success was difficult. That's not true, right? It never has been. The assumption was that if I could only get my music in front of people, I'd have a chance and I'd become a global star. Then streaming arrived. Suddenly artists could distribute globally. No record deal was required, no radio station required, no physical distribution required, really. You could make your own merch. For the first time in history, an artist in Sydney, Dubbo, Perth, Toowoomba, across the globe, Spain, whatever, can upload a song and make it available worldwide. So the distribution was the issue, not the competition. It was always there. And it sounded like the ultimate level playing field, right, in many ways, but something is interesting. Most artists discovered that access wasn't the biggest obstacle after all. Getting the attention was. And because when everyone gets access, everybody becomes your competition. So let's put that into perspective. In the past, a local band might have been competing against, the other bands in town, maybe the next town over, maybe the region, somewhere where you could drive within 100 kilometres. So you're a band in Newcastle, you might have come to Sydney, you might have gone as far as Wollongong, you might have gone up to Foster, right? The bands were playing the same venues, so the artists getting played on the local radios and local regional radios, I'm talking about community radios, were the local artists, right? There wasn't anybody interfering with it. But what happens today, right? A local emerging indie artist in Australia releases a song on Spotify and immediately competes against the likes of other now independent artists, Taylor Swift, Ed Sheeran, Drake, The Weeknd. Every major label release, every independent artist in Australia, every independent in the United States and across the globe is now competing for that attention of limited people who listen to music, and every artist uploading music from every country around the world, all at the same time. So the distribution was the issue. It's not anymore, right? The attention is. So how do you make yourself that attention? How do you grab the attention of those listeners, right? Most people don't rely on other people. They rely on recommendations these days. You think about your own listening habits. How often do you sit down and actively search for a completely new, unknown artist? Someone you've never heard of, you've never been spoken to about. You just put the search word into Google or Spotify or whatever your platform you're using, and you go, give me the emerging indie artists in Sydney, Australia, or whatever. You don't, do you? Right? You click on the playlist that's been presented in front of you that someone else has created or curated, and then you click on something else that is presented to you as a recommendation. You sit down and you listen to those things. That's all driven by recommendations, by playlists, by playlist curators, by algorithms, by friends, your social media. The reality is listeners have access to more music than they could possibly consume. And this creates a new challenge, discovery, because making music isn't rare anymore. Getting noticed is. And this is why many artists become frustrated. They'll release a fantastic song, professionally recorded, professionally mixed, attached with a video, professionally mastered, and 6 months later, it has a few hundred streams. That's it. Right? Meanwhile, another artist uploads a simple acoustic song recorded in a bedroom and gains millions of plays. Now, why is that? Right? I was reading an article this morning, and it was the same issue. Nowadays, a mediocre artist can get more playlists and plays than a professional, good quality artist, right? It's about it's the perception. It's how they market themselves, and this is where many artists become frustrated, right? So meanwhile, in fact, I'd even argue that music has become abundant, right? Attention has become valuable, and once you understand that, the industry starts making a lot of sense, because the artists succeeding today aren't necessarily the ones creating the better music. We've discussed that. Many are simply better at creating awareness. They're better at building communities. They're better at telling stories, casting emotion, creating content. And obviously the label artists have a huge team behind them to do all this, right? They're giving audiences reasons to care. Now, the music still matters, regardless of who makes it, but the music is only part of the equation. Think of it like this, right? At an opening of a restaurant, you could have the best food in Australia, but if nobody knows the restaurant exists, you'll still struggle to sell it. The food matters, but the visibility matters too. The same principle applies to music, right? So when artists say streaming is making success harder, I understand what they mean, but I don't think streaming created the problem. I think streaming revealed the problem. There's a difference there. It didn't create it, it revealed it. There've always been more talented musicians than there are successful musicians, right? The difference is that we can see it now. We're witnessing an incredible artist release schedule of music every day. We're hearing them, we're finding them, and we're realizing just how much talent exists out there. Now, what's even more interesting is I was having a conversation with my daughter. She's 19 going on 20 the other day, and we're talking about Instagram and things like that. And for those who don't realize, yes, I'm a dinosaur. But Instagram, if you don't grab someone's attention in 3 to 5 seconds, they scroll straight past you. And this is why these viral hooks are so important, right? The challenge is giving people a reason to stop and listen to your music, and stopping them from just scrolling past within 3 seconds, and that's a very, very, very short amount of time. So now, if we go onto that, has the playlist culture replaced traditional radio gatekeepers with algorithms? For decades, radio programmers decided what people heard, and it still happens, right? Don't get me wrong, it does. They will not play a song on the radio that's too explicit or has the wrong connotation, the wrong style of music for their station. So they still do have programmers that decide what people are listening to when they're listening to commercial radio stations, or even some of the internet ones like Local Sounds. A small number of individuals controlled that access to a massive audience, right? Artists complained about gatekeepers, I couldn't get my stuff on, they were being unfair. Then streaming arrived. Many believe the gatekeepers have disappeared, but have they really? I don't think so, right? Have they simply just become a computerized algorithm that's thinking about its own listening habits and pushing it onto somebody else, right? It's about looking at how popular they are, or is it the current style of music that they want to push on that particular playlist. Now, we still have playlist curators, of course. We do one for Oz Soundz as well, right? When was the last time you actually searched for that completely unknown artist? And I think it's never happening, right? There's very few. There's lots of people on the internet these days, and Instagram in particular, getting people, send us your songs, we'll put it on the radio, send us your songs. Well, that's great, but thousands and thousands of people are sending those same people those songs, right? You still got the competition issue. So, think about your own listening habits. Most listeners now consume music through what? Spotify recommendations, Discover Weekly playlists, YouTube recommendation, the inaugural TikTok trends. Algorithms and these platforms now influence discovery at a major scale that radio never achieved and never could have, right? The difference is that we don't always see the gatekeeper, that's all. It's zeros and ones in the back end of a computer system, or a curator that's actually doing an individual playlist. Now, this creates an interesting problem, right? Artists begin creating music specifically for the algorithm. Songs become shorter, hooks arrive faster, introductions disappear, because you don't want to have the long-term introduction or the long, intro that some of the 80s rock and things like that had, right? That attention span shrinks, and it's the same thing with Instagram. If you don't grab their attention in that first part of the song, they're passing by it, right? It might be a great song, but they're just passing by it. No one's listening to it, right? And it's not because the audiences demanded this to happen. It's because the platforms reward that type of behavior. So, question for you listeners is, have we really replaced human gatekeepers with mathematical ones? And if so, is that actually an improvement? I'd ask you to have a think about that. So why do so many great artists still struggle to find an audience? This is perhaps the most important question of all, because talent alone has never guaranteed success, right? It certainly doesn't today. Every city has extraordinary musicians that nobody has ever heard of. Now, why is that? Because music isn't simply competing against other music, it's competing against everything, right? Netflix, YouTube, gaming, all that other stuff that it's competing against. And of course, it's also competing against podcasts, which I particularly like, seeing I run 2 of them, right? And social media, right? An inordinate amount of time is spent on social media. The average family doesn't really sit down and have too many in-depth conversations these days because everybody's scrolling on a damn device, right? It's a pretty sad state of affairs. And then you've got, of course, the inaugural sport and news and whatever. And of course, we were disappointed in the Blues versus the Maroons last night, but we'll get them back in Game 3. So music is now fighting for attention within an economy built entirely on distraction. It's being no longer is it good to be a great musician. Being discoverable matters just as much, and being memorable matters even more, right? That visibility is really, really, really important. So incredible artists will continue to struggle because they believe that quality should speak for itself, and I do agree with that. Quality is what I'm after, right? But unfortunately, audiences have to find the music before they can actually appreciate its quality, and that's where we're lacking a bit. So if we go on to that social media topic, is it now more important than the music itself? For me, the answer is no, right? This is the question that many musicians hate hearing, but it's true, because instinctively we want to say, no, the music should come first. And artistically, that's true, but commercially, the answer is a little bit more complicated, right? There are artists creating exceptional music who struggle to gain traction, and there are others, like I said before, that are creating average music who build enormous audiences through personality, storytelling, design, style, and engagement, etc. Why? Because those fans connect with those people before they connect with the songs. It's more about the person and who they are and their persona than it is the actual music, right? Many listeners now discover artists long before hearing a full song. They see it on social media. They get a recommendation from their friend, whatever. And that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, right? You would have had to go and see the band play and make your own choice of whether they were any good or not, and whether that fit with your style of music. They might have been great, they just didn't fit with your style, right? The danger is obvious. Artists can now become content creators, or have to become content creators, who occasionally release music, and that's anti to a lot of artists, right? You're there to do the creativity, to do the music, and that you're not there to market it. You're not probably even good at that. A lot of people struggle with that, right? They're good at writing songs and making music and improving the world and whatever, but and I'm not saying that social media entities and influencers aren't important. They are, right? But they have a different function, right? Not all artists are good at doing that. So that's why teams are important, right? Now, social media has transformed them. They've transformed musicians into media brands. Audiences no longer follow music; they follow journeys, they follow stories, personalities. They want to see stuff like behind the scenes content, and I quite personally like that as well, right? Behind the scenes content and how you start writing a song, and what are the creative processes, and what does your daily life look like? We as humans are really interested in each other, right? We're social beings. We want to know what goes on in somebody's life, especially if it's an artist we actually like and respect and admire. How do they do that? I wish I could do that. Is the usual thing. They a lot of listeners see the artists and discover them before they actually hear some of their material, or they hear one portion of it and not the rest, right? So the challenge for modern musicians is balance. They've got to strike a balance. Be strong enough with your music to get that initial grab, but you need to be able to retain them. So the content must be engaging. It must be strong enough to attract them. And if you're not good at doing that, grab a friend, get someone who's good at doing that social media context that's not an artist, right? They will help you do that. It may be for a fee, it may not. So perhaps the better question is social media more important than music? The real question is, can great music survive if nobody knows the artists exist? Now, in 2026, that's a question every independent musician must answer. What's fascinating is that all 4 questions that I've put to it point to the same issue. We have more tools than ever before, more access than ever before, more opportunities than ever before, yet artists still struggle to get the airplay, to get the recognition, to get the identification. The technology's changed, the platforms have changed, but the battle for attention remains exactly the same as it always was. So it's not really about distribution models or attention as individual items. It's the whole process, right? We've changed platforms and we can get it out there, so distribution is no longer a problem. But grabbing somebody's attention in a plethora of music of all different types and genres on a daily basis is the issue. You need to find your artists. And I think, from a grassroots level, and I'm all about grassroots and indie level, you need to do your time in the local clubs, the local pubs, the venues, to get your base. From there, you can move on. Sure, that doesn't mean you don't do the social media thing, but you need to practice and hone your craft in that local scene. I think that's really, really important. Now, if we think about it, social media and strong audience and streaming is important, right? Let's take the example of Royal Otis, Australian indie band, built a strong audience through streaming and social media, but much of their international growth came from viral moments and playlist exposure rather than traditional radio. So that's a success story of that. Their success highlights how artists today are often discovered through algorithms and online sharing rather than broadcasters. Now, they're proof that you don't necessarily need a major radio campaign to break globally anymore. Their rise came through a combination of great songs, strategic covers, streaming momentum, and word-of-mouth sharing. But they're also proof that discovery today often depends on platforms and algorithms, putting your music in front of the right audience at the right time. Now, that's the challenge, right? And this perfectly leads into our next topic, which, if audiences aren't finding artists through traditional channels anymore, where are they finding them? And increasingly, that's through film, television, and gaming, and a thing called sync licensing. So we're going to talk about that next. All right, so welcome back, and leading on from our first little segment there, we're going to talk now about sync licensing. For those who don't know what sync licensing is about putting your songs and your material inside television series, movies, documentaries, adverts, streaming, games, that sort of stuff, and away from the traditional thought about music and where it's done and through albums and EPs. So, it might be the biggest opportunity for independent artists right now. It might not be your traditional what you're thinking would happen with your music, but sync licensing through all those other content and mediums is quite a reasonable way to get your music out to the masses, be discovered, and there's quite a few artists that have actually managed to do that, having examples of their music in popular TV shows, popular series that have resulted in them becoming quite successful artists. So things that we're going to talk about, like a single placement, can create more exposure than months of promotion for your normal music, and that's a true story. People emotionally connect with the music when it's attached to that story. The music attached to a story or an emotion or anything, which is the basis of everything creative, because you're trying to draw that human emotion out. When it's attached to that story and they can visualize that song along with their favorite show or a particular segment of that show, that's very powerful. And a song in the right scene can become almost unforgettable on that basis. And that streaming spike for that song then, which is probably still out on Spotify and Apple Music, etc., and all the other platforms, that will result in a streaming spike that can be enormous. It really is important why one placement can change everything. A single placement can actually create you as an artist more exposure than you would normally get through months of your normal promotion activities, and at a fraction of the cost, because they pay you to have your music onto that show. So let's really start with a reality check. Okay, how many independent artists spend months promoting a single release? They do, right? They release their first song. They run out of cash. They don't have the ability and the backing to do the marketing, so they spend months promoting a single release or a single show. They post on social media multiple times. They run Facebook ads potentially. They pitch playlists. They send press releases and their electronic press kits out. They contact local community radio stations and the more commercial ones. They email blogs, And after 6 months, unless they get picked up by some sort of famous YouTuber or something like that, they might gain a few thousand streams. Now there are exceptions to that rule. Okay, there are exceptions to that rule where an artist who's quite who I know quite well, Zenobia, she got picked up with her first song "Devour Me," and it ran wild, as did the second one, "Throne of Want." When a YouTuber picked it up and ran with it. He was a music YouTuber, and that got millions of streams. I think the last time I spoke to Zenobia, it was something to the tune of 3.5 million on Throne of Want. So it does actually work in some cases. Now compare that to, but that's not the run of the mill, right? So compare that to a successful sync placement. Your song appears in a Netflix series, or a popular video game, or a major television drama, or a documentary, or something of that nature. It might even be a viral YouTube production, and then suddenly millions of people are hearing your music that they would not have normally heard, right? Because they weren't going there to listen to your music. They had no clue who you were. But they're now playing that video game, or they're now watching that TV series that's been advertised, and they're interested in the story and the story behind it, and the actors and stuff like that. But they're hearing your music as part of that, and that just drives that audience. It's incredibly powerful. But they found it not because they were looking for it, right? Your music found them by virtue of being as part of this sync licensing, and that's the key difference, right? Traditional promotion is you asking audiences to come for your music. Sync licensing is about taking your music directly to the audience through other mediums. And that's incredibly powerful. So, as artists, we're often trying to interrupt people, get them to come along, trying to convince them to come and watch the show, to buy the merch, to listen to the song, to, like it and follow it and all that sort of stuff. But sync doesn't interrupt it, right? Sync just happens in the background of whatever media it's on. So it enhances an experience that they're already having that wasn't directly music related. And that's why it works. It works great. Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to end up with a sync licensing deal, but, if you do, and you've got something, let's consider something like Stranger Things, the moment your music gets put on Stranger Things, and this has happened to a number of artists, where that series goes gangbusters. The younger people love it. I loved it. And you listen to those pieces of music that are attached to that story, right? So if you had, this is a question for you guys out there. If you had $5,000 to spend on marketing, would you spend it on your advertising, or would you spend it trying to secure a major sync placement? Now, I'm not saying one way or the other. You might spend that $5,000 doing it on your own advertising and putting releases out and advertising on Google and Facebook and TikTok and all that sort of stuff, and influencers. But also, you could spend that money on it to try and secure a major sync placement. Put it in with the sync advertisers. It may very well get picked up. Now, whether you'd spend $5,000 on it or you split it in half, but it's just got to be part of your marketing budget and part of what you think you should do, right? Now, with the sync licensing, and because it's attached to a story, right, people emotionally connect with that music when it's attached to that story. And this is where psychology gets a bit interesting. Now, I'm not pretending to be a psychologist. I'm certainly not. But, human beings are wired for emotion and wired for stories and connection. And whilst they connect through your music, they also connect through the visual medium and the story that's behind, a particular TV show or whatever, right? We remember stories far better than we actually have that information. We associate that music that you've written with that particular story, right? And that's when music becomes significantly more powerful when attached to that emotion. So imagine, for a minute, you're hearing a song randomly on Spotify. You've never heard it before. It's not bad. You might enjoy it. You might save it. You might forget it and leave it till tomorrow. Now imagine hearing that same song during the final scene of a film, right? The hero finally achieves their goal, the couple reunites, whatever it might be. One for me, I'm a mad fan of Top Gun, right? So the original Top Gun. I love Maverick as well, but the original Top Gun. And that song for the Top Gun series, for me, I love it. I love that song. I can't recall the name of it at the moment, but that's the song that you just associate directly with Top Gun. Now, there are a whole bunch of others, right? But if you can associate your music with something like the underdog winning, or the audience, becomes emotionally invested. They have in the case of Top Gun, for me, they win. They shoot down the enemy and they win, and everybody's celebrating. That's that song, right? I remember the scene when Tom Cruise is riding his motorbike bat out of hell, down towards the Miramar, and it's just great. It's great stuff, right? But from that point on, when they've associated it, every time you hear that song, they're reminded of that feeling, or they're reminded of that story. And that song becomes bigger than itself, right? It's no longer just music. It's a memory trigger. And that's something that marketing campaigns really struggle to achieve just through music, all right? But great storytelling does that naturally. So how do you think as an artist you might be able to create a persona, create a story, and this is why some of the albums these days are trying to do like trilogies and every song links to the other ones, and then maybe comes back around, right? So they're trying to build stories into their music, and I think that's a key part of what you need to do. And this is why music supervisors are so important, right? They understand how music can amplify emotion in people. They're not just choosing songs. So when they're looking at your song for a sync licensing deal for a particular piece of media, they're not just choosing the random songs, right? They're trying to create an emotional experience. Does the song fit right in the scene so that it will become unforgettable? Does it really convey that emotion to us? Does the lyrics work? Does the rhythm work? Does the melody work? Does it create that sense of urgency or feel or horror or whatever it might be, right? So that's a really important part of getting a song on sync licensing. So let's talk about some famous examples, right? Most people know Running Up the Hill by Kate Bush, but millions of younger listeners discovered it through that series Stranger Things, right? That song wasn't new. The fact that it was placed in the show was, and that scene, the emotional impact that was created, suddenly that song that was released in around 1985 became one of the biggest songs in the world again, right? Think about that. It wasn't because of radio. It wasn't because of a new album. It wasn't because the artist released something. It was because of, and it wasn't because of a marketing campaign, right? It was because one powerful scene was associated with that particular song that millions of people watched during that series. Now, the same thing has happened repeatedly through entertainment history, right? Songs become attached to moments, moments become cultural memories and icons. And for independent artists, that's incredibly encouraging because it proves people don't always need years of exposure to discover your music. Sometimes they just need one perfect moment, one perfect scene, one perfect placement, and that's all it takes. Now, I'm not suggesting for any minute that should happen with every artist, and it will happen with every artist. It won't, right? You've got to be in the right place, right time, have the right song for the right medium. But it is another thing to think about to get your music out into the market. Now, once it's been in there, once it's been associated with some sort of sync licensing deal, that might be the start of your career, and that will result in you selling out stadiums, okay? So can you think of a song that instantly reminds you, and I remember what the Top Gun was. It's Danger Zone, right? I had to look this up, but it was Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins in the original Top Gun, right? That's the power of sync. I remember that. I'm into the danger zone, and apologies for my singing, but everybody knows that associated with Top Gun, right? And that streaming spike that followed can be enormous, and I'm sure it did when they reused it in the Maverick movies. All right, now let's talk numbers because this is where artists really start paying attention, okay? When audiences hear a song in a show, they don't usually stop there, right? They Shazam it, they Google it, they search it on Spotify, they watch it on YouTube, they follow the artist, they add the song to their playlist, they share it with their friends. So this creates a snowballing cumulative effect, right? So one sync placement often creates a chain reaction. The placement becomes discovery. Right, remember we were talking about discovery was part of the attention that was hard to get. We used to think the problem was distribution with the creation of the streaming platforms. It's no longer about distribution; it's about attention. So that's one way of getting the attention, right? So discovery becomes your streaming becomes followers become your fans become your ticket buyers, and your ticket buyers become super fans and follow you on Patreon and stuff like that, right? That's why the best sync opportunities are not just licensing deals. Right, they're audience building opportunities. So think of them as that in your journey. So someone hears your song for 30 seconds in a TV show, you might go, it's nothing, they missed the main part of it. That's not the point, right? That 30 seconds in a television show, 3 months later, they're down buying a ticket to your concert or to your gig or you're out buying your album, and that's a remarkable pathway, right? And it's happening every day for people. So here's the question I'd leave you with. For years, artists believed radio was the ultimate goal, but today, what would you rather have? 50 spins on a commercial radio and then nothing? Or one emotionally powerful placement in a globally streamed television series? Because increasingly the answer isn't as obvious as it once was, right? Everybody thought it was radio and that was the ultimate. Everybody thought it was selling out a stadium, and it's still part of the goal. And that's why sync licensing has become one of those important conversations in modern music. Now, why does this matter, right? Music supervisors, they often want authentic, independent artists. They don't necessarily want the biggest artists. One, it costs them too much. Two, they might not have the right song. Three, it creates opportunities for musicians without huge followings to get on the centre stage, right? But exposures alone is not enough. The industry is beginning to realise something really important, and that's that fans matter more than listeners. Now, this is the same as what's going on with the do-it-yourself studio, right? The people are turning away. Artists nowadays are turning away from the big labels and the big studios to try and do it themselves, right? And you're starting to see people advertise on Instagram with, you follow us and you pay the shipping and we'll send you our CD for free, right? Now, that's about fans. And if you can turn those fans into buying fans, that's even better, mate. They're more than just listeners. They'll come to your concerts, they'll buy your album, they'll buy your CD of the album, they'll follow you on the streaming stuff, they'll buy your merch, your T-shirt, your whatever you're going to produce, right? So you've turned those what was once listeners into a super fan. So can I give you a couple of concrete examples? G-Flip, Australian artist G-Flip saw a major boost when the song Bet on Fire was featured during the key scene in the streaming series Off Campus. Now, I never watched it, but the placement reportedly generated a 230% increase in Spotify listeners for that song. If we also have a look at Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill, which appeared in the TV show Stranger Things, as I mentioned. Now, that song returned to the charts worldwide nearly 4 decades after it was originally released and reportedly generated millions in royalties. Now, she didn't re-release it. It was just put into the right show at the right time. Final example, Tame Impala, right? They've benefited from numerous film, television, advertising sync placements, helping to expose the music to audiences far beyond their traditional indie circles. Now, those guys started off at, I think, the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, right, in the Contemporary Music program. So, you can see how this power of sync marketing and being associated with a story or a show or a TV plot or whatever can really have some great impact for independent musical artists. Very shortly, we're going to talk about the Superfan Economy, and I think it's one of the smartest shifts that's actually happening in music right now, and we'll do that after a short break. All right, so Superfan Economy. So what is it? Artists are moving away from chasing everybody, right? They're not trying to chase the world anymore. Instead, they're focusing on those people that are their biggest supporters and what I'm going to dub as the superfans. And I didn't coin that term, but they're superfans. So if we think about it, would you rather have 500,000 passive listeners who never attend a concert, they listen on the stream, it goes into their Spotify, it might increase your followers a little bit, or 500 fans, so less than what, math is not my strong point, but 1% of it, less than 1%, 500 fans who buy everything, who attend your shows, who buy your merch, who share your music, who support your crowdfunding campaigns. Now I know a few successful independent artists and some that haven't been, but would you choose the second option, or would you still rather keep the bigger number, even though they're not buying anything and not adding to your income stream? So things like Patreon membership, subscriber community, exclusive releases, private live streams and webinars, and limited edition products and direct-to-fan platforms are becoming more commonplace. And I think personally during COVID, I watched quite a few of the artists do their things from COVID locations in their homes. The Delta Grunge of the world that did something for us every week, and a whole bunch of others, right? So those were really important. That was about them, connecting with their fans. I recently heard that Taylor Swift's hired out Madison Square Gardens for her wedding. Now, why would she do that? Personally, I wouldn't, but she can do whatever she wants. But it's about connecting with her fans. She's thanking her fans for supporting her and her career to get her where she is now. And the key message is really that attention is valuable, right? It's not the distribution, it's that attention. And loyalty is priceless. Once you've got somebody who's a loyal fan, they will keep following you unless you do something quite ridiculous to change. Artists who own their audience are becoming more sustainable than artists who simply rent attention from the algorithms. I would never, ever recommend relying on just the algorithms, right? You can use them as a test case, you can use them as a growth pattern, but then you've got to convert these people over to paying fans. And that transition, something interesting happens when artists stop chasing algorithms, right? They start experimenting, which brings us to genre. So, changes in genre are often associated with some of these artists, right? So if we think about the Superfan Economy, just to close it before we get into genre, Taylor Swift's probably one of the most visible examples of the Superfan Economy, right? Limited edition merchandise, exclusive vinyl variants, different colours, collector releases, fan community, special events. Now, of course, she didn't do all that herself, right? I mean, she's independent now, but she had a big label behind her. But that's the point, right? She had a say in what was going to happen, and to the point where she went, I've had enough of this, I'm going to do it my way. And she re-recorded all the masters, right? And people bought them up, absolutely bought them up, as did I, right? I'm not afraid to say I'm a Swiftie. So those fan communities, those special events, those music's one part, the exclusive performance stuff, that's all. They're not buying simple songs anymore. They're buying participation in the artist's journey, right, to stardom. Not that I'm a K-pop fan, I'm really not, but groups such as BTS have built their entire ecosystem around fan engagement. Memberships, exclusive content, merchandise, community platforms, and they're massive, right? Their success demonstrates the financial power of highly engaged fans. So I guess the independent artist lesson is this. If you had 500 fans who bought every vinyl release, attended every local show, purchased every shirt you had, how different would your music career look today if it was that, versus just relying on the algorithms and the Spotify streams, etc. Now, if we take a tangent now into genre, right? They used to box artists into particular genres, right? You were either rock, you were country, you were hip hop, you were electronic, you were jazz. Now, a lot of artists are changing so that they're all part of one. These genres, I'll ask you the question: are genres actually dying? Because they're kind of merging, right? There's a whole raft of different metal styles. They were once metal. There was heavy metal, there was thrash metal. Now we've got a whole raft of them, right? So the rise of genre blending is happening, right? And this is happening through do-it-yourself emerging indie artists, through bedroom producers. They're combining acoustic instruments with electronic beats and production, made easy through the power of DAWs. Rock bands are using hip-hop influences. They're doing collaborations. Pop artists are incorporating house and dance elements into their music. So, I see that there's this genre bending, changing cycle going. Now, if you're a purist, I love my metal, I love my rock and roll, but I can appreciate opera and jazz. I'm a student of music. I was at Newcastle Conservatorium. I played tuba and trombone when I was younger, and now I dabble. But those genre things, you were one genre. You were classical, you were jazz, you were rock, you were pop, right? That doesn't exist anymore, really, right? Really doesn't exist. So this rise of genre blending is happening. And audiences no longer discover music through record store shelves, right? They do. I love still going to record stores and finding the old albums and vinyls, and I'm so glad that LPs and vinyls are actually coming back. Bringing back my childhood. But they discover playlists instead. Right? Playlists care less about genre. They care more about the mood, the feel. That's what I think about genre bending. You're going to get the traditionalists. There's some bands that will say, "No, we're metal, we're rock. That's what we're doing." But you get the others that aren't necessarily put into that same little box, right? Their style, is based on the energy they produce, the atmosphere they play in, and that freedom has led to another trend, which is the return of authenticity, right? So, when you think about other genres dying, let's go with an example of Post Malone, right? Post Malone has moved between hip hop, rock, country, and pop influences. Jelly Roll, he blends country, rock, and hip hop audiences, and I love Jelly Roll stuff. Love Posty as well. Australian act Rufus Du Sol combines electronic production with live instrumentation and songwriting elements traditionally associated with indie rock. So listeners are increasingly searching for a mood rather than a particular genre. So that late night drive has become more important than whether a song sits in rock, pop, or electronic. And I love the fact that the return to authenticity is happening, right? So for years, music became increasingly polished. Perfect vocals, perfect timing, perfect tuning, the rise of auto-tune, perfect production. And now, what I'm craving and what I'm seeing others crave as well is seeing audiences crave that imperfection, that raw emotional grunt that you get at the pub gig, right? So you want the live sounding drums. It may be that you do it with an electronic set and make it and use one of the kits, but that live sounding drum that's not perfect, that's offbeat a little, the room ambience, the human performances, humans stuff up, right? They don't play it perfectly when they're live. Those songs feel genuine, and I think listeners are starting to increasingly connect with artists who actually sound real again, right, rather than overproduced. So I guess my question to you is, have we reached perfection? I don't know, right? I don't think we have. I don't think you can get to perfection, and I don't think you should either, right? I think artistry for an independent artist is whatever they want to make. What is it that makes them independent? What is it that makes them authentic? And what is it that they want to communicate to their listeners and to their fan base? That's the important stuff, right? And if that's a bit grungy and with a bit too much reverb and a lot of distortion, or the clear classical sort of style or jazz style, that's important for them to do. And I think audiences are connecting now and seeking emotional honesty instead of perfect performance, right? And this is also seen why not the best performers become more popular on the streaming platforms because of their persona and what they're about and what they produce and why and who they collaborate with, right? So some of the most successful independent releases aren't technically perfect, and that's fine. They don't need to be, right? They're emotionally compelling, and that's what people remember. That's what people remember, that emotional connection, going back to the sync licensing. And perhaps nowhere is this more visible than the resurgence of the physical music, right? So let's talk about Noah Kahan. Exploded globally with songs that felt deeply personal and human rather than highly manufactured, right? And I know my children actually particularly liked Noah Kahan's stuff. Zach Bryan, right, built a massive audience through raw songwriting and emotionally direct recordings. And, this is what we want in our music, right? We want that emotional connection. And some of the best songs that live the test of time are about emotionally driven events that have been experienced by those songwriters and those artists, right? So listeners are surrounded by perfect content all day. If you want perfect pitch, perfect content, an AI can do that. Not that I profess AI music. I don't. I hate it. But it can be perfect, right? You can sit there and you can change all the notes that you didn't play properly, but you put them on tune. Now, I'm not saying there's not a case for using auto-tune and things, but, would you rather hear that technically perfect vocal with no emotion, monotoned, or a slightly imperfect performance that just makes you feel something emotionally at your deepest, darkest roots? I know which one I'm choosing. It's definitely the latter, right? So, let's think about, what is it about human nature, and in particular, fans wanting to be part of the journey with an artist, right? How do they do that? That's where they start buying your vinyls, the collectibles, and they want physical music again, which is why I think we're seeing the rise of vinyls and records back again, right? You can't own something that sits on a streaming platform. But if you go to the show, you buy the LP, you've got a physical copy. It's in your hands. You own it, right? It's something you can use time and time again without just turning on your iPhone or your Samsung and listening to it. And the quality, I think, is way better anyway. But streaming dominates without a doubt. But vinyl is continuing to come back, and it's continually coming back and growing. Now, they're quite pricey at the moment. I get that, but that's because there's limited runs. So it's about why do fans want it? They want it because it's a physical thing. It's got ownership. It's got connection. It's got collectability. It might be signed. It might not be. Fans want something tangible, and a streaming link isn't a keepsake, right? A signed record is. A limited pressing is. A collector's item is, right? A T-shirt is. That's where a lot of that stuff happens. People want that physical connection to the event, to the gig, etc. And there's an artist out of Newcastle called Kerry Archer, and he's our monthly featured artist, I suppose you could say, on the ozsoundz.com.au website. He's just put out his EP, right, in physical form, right? There's 100 of them. First 100, I think, are signed. They come with a hand-drawn picture and whatever. That's a physical item. I snapped one up, right? So that's the sort of thing that you got to be doing. And are fans buying the music, or are they really buying the connection? I think they're both, right? They're both. They're buying the music because they love the music and they love the connection. But they also have something tangible they can hold in their hands and say, hey, man, I remember this. And I remember the first time I met one of my wife's friends. He's a mad Liverpool fan, loved the guy to death. And I walked into his house the first time I met him, and he goes to me, who do you follow in the football? I went, I had no idea, nothing about it. So I went, Newcastle Knights. He says, no, the real football, your soccer. I went, I don't know. I wouldn't follow it at all, but I did come up with the worst answer possible. I said Man United. And he goes, no, you can't do that. We're both Liverpool, right? So my children then, from ever and a day, got Liverpool shirts, Liverpool scarves, Liverpool everything. But at the end of the night, we're sitting there and we're listening to an album, and it has We'll Never Walk Alone playing. And he goes, I was in the stadium and you can hear me singing. I'm going, yeah, I can hear you, Andy, and the other 70,000 screaming fans. But that's that connection I'm talking about, right? That's the connection that he's associated with that album, that song, and that passion he has for Liverpool. And that's exactly what you're after. So this is where I think it goes, right? You can really connect as independent artists if you have something produced that you can give to your fans or you can sell to your fans, right? So there's a UK indie band, English teacher, they've spoken about merchandise and vinyl sales being a critical revenue source for them, and often more important than the performance fees from the live show. And they often make more out of it as well, right? Sometimes we know that it's not the best payment for artists, but and that's getting better, we hope. But one independent artist documented a self-release album where about 93% of the revenue came from the vinyl sales. The streaming only generated over 2% of revenue. Why is that? Because the streaming revenue from those platforms is absolutely hideously terrible, and that we've got to try and fix that as well. But you get the point. The people would rather buy something physical, right? And artists don't sell vinyl because it's convenient. They sell vinyl because fans want something tangible to hold, to take home, to play again, to remember how they felt when they were at that gig in the front row, in the mosh pit or whatever, and talk about it with their friends and talk about it with their families. So when was the last time you framed a Spotify playlist and put on your wall? Does it actually mean anything? I don't think so, right? Not at all. Tangible, physical merchandise. I know I've got a ton of shirts from different gigs, right? That's what we want. That's what the fans want. So that's what you need to do, right? You need to produce some merch that is tangible. So let's think about as our last part of the segment, finish what producers are hearing in studios right now. Now, let's talk about sound. What are the producers hearing? What techniques are emerging? What styles are shaping the records? Now, they're after organic textures, live instrumentation again. There's some hybrid electronic acoustic production stuff, but they want the rawness, right? The room ambience, the less quantization, the feeling to it. There's some dance influences coming across into mainstream genres, etc. But we're seeing production become less about perfection and more about character as well. And this is just raw human nature. We want connection. We're emotional beings. We want to be able to connect to the music, to the artist, to the character. And humans are imperfect, right? We are not perfect as much as we think we are, right? And that's what people want. They want that connection. They want that character. And it's less about perfection now, right? Can you make it perfect? I don't know, right? But can you make it memorable? And the answer is definitely yes. You can make it memorable for every single one of those people, even if their memory is different from another one's. So if everybody's using the same plugins, the differentiator becomes creativity, not the technology, right? And not the platform it goes out on. So, thinking about some of the production trends, Billie Eilish and Phineas have helped normalise intimate, minimal production styles that feel personal rather than overproduced. And I love the story where she was in Sydney and had the what do they call that thing, the crossing button, and it went right, and it became the basis of Bad Guy, the back end basis of Bad Guy. Now that's amazing, right? I love that, and I love the fact that they told that story, because that really does ground it to what it was. This thing was a noise that came from a device that is not everywhere across the world, happens to be in Sydney and makes that buzzing noise, right, as you cross the road. So the next big breakthrough producer probably won't be the person with the biggest plugin collection. It'll be the person that has the most recognisable, tangible sound that's associated with them. All right, we're almost at time, and if there's one message I want listeners to take away from today, it's this. The opportunities for independent artists have never been greater. But you need to understand that the rules have changed, right? Discovery is harder. Connection and emotion matters way more. Authenticity wins every time. Your superfans matter. And just remember those sync licensing deals that might not be the traditional way you want to see your music out there, but will get you there if you're lucky enough to do that. You need to build that community around your music, around your style, around your, even the way you walk, talk, look, interact in the community, right? People are watching this stuff, right? They're recording it on their phones. Stupid stuff you do will come back to bite you, right? So if I look at everything happening in music right now, one theme keeps appearing. The artists succeeding aren't necessarily the loudest. They're the artists that are building genuine connections with their fans, genuine connections with industry, and whether that's through sync licensing, direct fan relationships, vinyl releases, live experiences, gigs, or authentic storytelling, it doesn't matter. That's the way it is, right? The technology changes and will continue to change at rapid pace. The platforms change, right? And this is where I think AI ultimately will lose, right? It can never do the connection, right? The trends will change, but that connection remains the most valuable currency in music. That connection, that rawness, that authenticity, that's what really matters, okay? All right, so our artist spotlight. We normally do this at each podcast, and I love doing it. And today's, I came across these guys on Spotify. They're I love my indie grunge, and this is a band called Select All out of Melbourne. We've normally done some Sydney bands because I'm up here, but I want to start traveling over the country. So if you're a band from all over the country, let me know. But Select All, hailing from the underground grunge scene, is an unapologetic five-piece band hailed from and formed in Melbourne, Australia. The music fuses old-school grunge grit with modern shoegaze tones, with their unrivaled energy and stage presence setting them apart from the rest. Now, I obviously haven't seen them. I haven't been down in Melbourne, so this is off their Spotify. But, I had to listen to their song, Don't Cry Over Spilt Milk, and I actually love it, right? It's a great song. You definitely need to go and have a look at it. Now, Select All was formed by drummer Emma Papa and vocalist Karina Walsh in 2019. The two best friends set out on a mission to take over the Australian music scene with the Deftones and Silverchair influenced sound. Now, Silverchair's from my hometown, mate, Newcastle. Love them. They have since joined forces with bassist Taylor Basso and guitarist Jess Nichols and Sam Skilbeck Hawks, where the band has grown to demand a significant presence within the Melbourne music scene. I hope to get down there one day and listen to them live. Their 2025 album Eaves and their discography is well worth a listen. So go check them out on the streaming platforms, but then buy their tickets, right? Go to their shows and their merch and support those Aussie independent artists. So remember that. Don't cry over spilt milk. This is from Select All, Melbourne Indie Grunge band. Hey guys, thanks for joining me on this special edition, as I'm calling it, of Oz Soundz Unleashed. Our 11th podcast. Wasn't sure when I started this whether we'd get this far, but I really enjoy doing it, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. So please spread the word. If you enjoyed today's discussion, share the episode with a fellow musician, producer, or music fan. We've got some plans coming up. You would have found something on the Instagram recently. It's called the Oz Indie Collective. That's mine. It's a separate thing. What I'm trying to do is build a network of creatives. Doesn't matter whether you're a musician, audio engineer, stage manager, photographer, videographer, whatever. I want to get the biggest creative network together on a single platform. So there'll be things like job adverts, and if you're looking for your next bass player or something or other, you'll be able to create a profile, which we're going to validate though, right? So you can't just put a profile on there if you've got no experience. So you'll have to get some sort of validation, and that's what we're trying to build. Now it'll be a couple of months before that's up, but look out for it. The Oz Indie Collective. If you think it's a good idea, let me know. If you think it's a garbage one, let me know as well. Please like and follow the Oz Soundz Unleashed podcast, as well as check us out on ozsoundz.com.au, which is our retail arm, but it's really more about community, right? The retail is secondary. What I'm trying to do is make enough to sponsor up-and-coming artists, but I can't do that without your help. So, keep those sounds real, keep creating, keep supporting independent music, regardless of where you sit in the cycle. If you're an audio engineer, give us a call. I want to talk to you, right? I want to put you on the podcast. If you got an interesting topic or story, or you did a gig and some stuff went wrong, I want to hear about it, right? We want to talk about techniques and things like that. And in the new year, my new year, which will be post July, I'm hoping to turn this into a video podcast as well, right? So that'll be even better. But until then, keep those sounds unleashed, and share and subscribe to our thing, and chat to you later. Oz Soundz Unleashed is a product of the Oz Soundz Group, recorded at Oz Soundz Studios in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia.